I think China has a lot of EVs at the moment that if they were to be sold here in the US, American car companies would be in big trouble. And I do think, according to this article here, the CEO of Ford, Jim Farley, agrees with that because he's been daily driving Xiaomi SU7 for 6 months, and he says that he does not want to give that back. And I think it's a very weird statement coming from the Ford CEO in an official podcast to say that. To me, it just doesn't make sense. To me, that would be something that you would maybe, analyze and, explore the car internally with your Ford team and then say, this is a really good EV, we need to step up our game, but not come out and say it officially like this. It's sort of surprising to me. So what we're going to do in this video is have a look at this Xiaomi SU7. I think it's a really cool design. It has a lot of Porsche in it, Porsche Taycan styling features for sure, and it also feels a little Tesla-like. But the value you get for what you're paying here for this car in China is just phenomenal, and that is why I think if this were to actually be sold here, American companies would be in trouble. So let's have a look at this article here, and let's see what happened here on this podcast that Jim Farley was on. This article from Car and Driver, I'm going to link it down in the description. So Ford CEO loves daily driving an electric sedan from a Chinese competitor. The model in question is the Xiaomi SU7. He's had it in the United States for 6 months. The SU7 is a full-size sedan and the first EV from Xiaomi, which is, in fact, a consumer electronics company. And that is something that I thought American consumer electronic companies would sort of follow that trend and put out more. For example, I really thought that Apple would put out an EV. They had it in the plans, but now I think they've ditched that idea. And I don't know. There is a lot of random companies for us here in the States that we really never heard of. But in China, they're huge, and they just keep pushing out these EVs, which is in fact really good value for the people of China. So on the Everything Electric Show podcast that he's been driving, he said that he's been driving a car from Xiaomi, a Chinese consumer electronics brand. While he normally doesn't like talking about the competition very much, Ford imported one of these cars to Chicago via Shanghai, and he's been driving it for the past 6 months. He also said he doesn't want to give it up, citing a radical approach to competing against Chinese automakers such as Xiaomi and BYD. And here you can see the car in question. And as I said, the design for a consumer electronics company, the first car they put out, has this of a congruent design. I think it's just a really nice execution from the design team of this company, even though, yes, it does have a lot of Porsche Taycan in it, specifically from a side we're going to have a look at in a minute. So the Xiaomi SU7 is a new model for 2024 in China. The manufacturer is better known for smartphones and consumer electronics company, but announced plans to build an electric vehicle in 2021. So they really, press the gas pedal here, so to speak. Maybe not when talking about EVs, but to get this car out to the market in just a few years. The SU7 is a full-size sedan, and despite carrying a relatively low price of around $30,000, and listen what it comes with here. It comes with air suspension, adaptive dampers, and active aero. That is something that you don't even get on a $60,000 Tesla Model 3. So that is the reason why I think these cars are pretty good value for just looking for an EV to take you from point A to point B. On top of that, Xiaomi also developed their own Level 2 Navigate on Autopilot system in this time frame, which is certified for use in 100 Chinese cities. It's met with such popular demand in China that it reportedly sold out of its entire 2024 production run on the first day. In fact, Xiaomi is said to have sold 100,000 units before the first model was even delivered, and that is what I would say is a home run for a brand new car company in this case. So let's jump in here and let's talk about this design and why Jim Farley seems to be in love with this. And again, I just think it's so weird to come out and say that publicly. I don't know what the reason would be for doing such a thing. I mean, if I were the CEO of Ford, I would drive a Ford Mach-E And you know, just as a symbol or representing the company I'm working for or that I'm CEO for, not drive a Chinese EV. But I guess I don't know what to think about it. Maybe it's something behind the scenes. Maybe it's some partnership brewing in the background between these two companies. I don't know. So let's have a look at this design here. First of all, I love the color. It looks very cool in this turquoise, almost Caribbean blue color that we have here. The front end looks very clean. Super nice design with the headlights here. Organic styling for the headlights. And it also has a pretty decent identifier here with these LEDs in the front end, with having one at the top and then one at the bottom as well. And they also are dynamic. You have a thicker piece here going into a thinner piece as it fades out into each corner up here and down here. And then we have this line, which is very much inspired by, of course, the Porsche Taycan, going in here and then connecting to the only intake that we have in the front end, which is, of course, the grill for the battery pack. Cooling coming in here, cooling the battery pack. Not sure if these are functional. They do look functional to me. I do think it will have an air slot down here through the front fender and then shooting out into the wheelhouse to reduce some pressure and some adding some aerodynamics onto this car. Love the sculpting that we have on top here also. It looks very sporty with this bulge of the front axle, and then we have these a couple of sharp lines that fades into the front end in this way right here on top of the hood. So overall, I think the front end just has, as I said, for a brand new company, the hardest thing to do. Everybody can design, you know, a nice looking car. It's very easy to do, but the hard thing is to create an identity for the brand moving forward. And if Xiaomi, with this big of a home run, I do believe they will continue to create cars. So the first model needs to have a very strong identity to it to build the rest of the lineup upon. So looking at the side view here, and this is where it gets very tricky. Is this a Porsche Taycan or what's going on here? Because this looks very, very much like a Porsche Taycan. And that is a problem that I think a lot of Chinese companies have, and that I don't really think that they care that much about if they copy European brands or American brands too much. But here you can clearly see that the side profile here is clearly inspired by the Porsche Taycan, which in itself it's not a bad thing because it makes a decent looking sporty sedan. And I'm glad that they the fact that they did not start out with putting out another SUV EV and instead went the sedan route. And I do think this also shows that they sold 100,000 units before they even delivered the first car. I think that shows that people still want to have sedans in these type of proportions, and they want to buy these type of cars. Very soft design here in the middle. We have one key line at the bottom right here, but this is where it gets very Taycan-ish. With this dip here, you can't really see it in the side view, but I do think it has an air slot here coming from the wheel well and shooting out some air right here. You can see it better in the rear view in a minute. Then you have the cameras located right here, similar to the camera position that we have on the Teslas. Wheel design as well. I mean, I think they nailed this design. Yes, it does look like a Porsche Taycan, but the wheel design as well. Thank you, Xiaomi, for not putting just a plate on top of the wheels to increase the aerodynamics, and instead having more of a traditional looking wheels here. And honestly, when I look at these proportions, it doesn't really look like an EV to me. This could 100% be an internal combustion engine with a small, maybe a 4-cylinder underneath here or something like that. The proportions have the styling of an internal combustion engine, and that is what I want to see with EVs, and not, you know, have this Mercedes EQ design, which looks like a bar of soap or something like that. Now looking at the rear end here, again, the most important thing when you're designing a new car is the identity. And I do think Xiaomi nailed the identity here. We have a beautiful ellipse going on here. You can see it right here, going from the top into the lower section, if I can hit it properly with the pen here. And then you have some very nice fluid design here inside of the taillights as well. Dynamic feeling, feels sketched out by hand. You know, I talked about this before, that some car companies now feel, BMW for example, a prime example of this, feels like they just starting to design their cars in a 3D software. They don't start with hand sketches anymore. But in this case, you can see we have a lot of fluid lines here, sketched out by hand, looking beautiful, and some very aggressive diffuser down here sort of double diffuser diaper here, because we have body color here that doesn't have a connection to the rest of the body color. Instead, it's separated by this black piece, and I call these diffuser diapers when we have that sort of situation down low. But it feels like a very grown-up design to me. It doesn't feel like a car that came out from a company that's been doing consumer electronics. This feels like a car, a design that came out from a company that's been in business for at least a couple of decades with this design. Beautiful design in the rear as well, and here you can clearly see this dip, or this air flow Taycan style that I talked about in the side view. Couldn't really see, but you can see how it dips in here. Very smooth again, organic looking feel for the Xiaomi SU7. Now, last but not least, the interior, both in the front and in the rear. Look at the level of equipment you get here. You get big screens in the rear. Not that I'm a huge fan of screens, but I do understand that if you come from a consumer electronics approach, your customers, this is what they want in a car. They want a lot of technology, a lot of screens. You can see that we have that here as well. The interior looks sort of minimalistic, very similar with the position of the big screen in the middle here, similar to what we have on Teslas, for example. Does not have any sort of I do wish they would have integrated this a little better, but it's very hard to do because you can see how big the screen is. How the heck are you supposed to integrate a screen like this into the dash in a beautiful way? It's a huge challenge, and I do think some companies just give up on that challenge and say, just put the screen on the dash and just mount it somehow in the back and just call it a day. But instead, however, we do have an integrated gauge cluster here that feels sort of well integrated in this little cave here. Glad that they decided to actually put a gauge cluster there. You also have probably some drive mode settings here, suspension settings. As I said, you do have adaptive suspension for $30,000, an active aero as well. I do like the color here. This light purple feels very refreshing to see. And probably some ambient lighting in here as well. A couple of cup holders here. This compartment feels very Tesla-like as well. The seats look decent. Not sure how comfortable they really are, but if Jim Farley, the CEO of Ford, has been driving it for 6 months and does not want to give it back, I assume it's a pretty comfortable car. Now, looking at the rear end here real quick, you can see the bulges here in the front end over the front axles, looking very sporty, looking very Porsche-ish. Maybe they don't have any ambient lighting in here. I'm not entirely sure, but you do have, I do think it's probably the same size as we have in the infotainment screen in the front, coming back here for both the passengers in the rear seat. So the reason why I wanted to make this video is because I think the only reason I can think of the CEO of Ford coming out with a statement like this publicly is because there is, as I said, a partnership of some sort in the background going on. And I do think that is what's happening here. If this comes to the United States for $30,000, I don't think it's going to matter that it's a Chinese company. People are still going to want to buy this just because of the value that you get out of this car. I don't think we're going to import it here, but I do think Ford now has an idea of what they need to do with their EV lineup if they really want to start to ramp up the EV sales.